This episode of Brief.IL is another unique one, as Operation Lion's Roar, or as it is known as the United States Operation Epic Fury, continues. In this episode, we turn inwards and discuss how the Israeli public views this operation. Unlike in the United States, where there seems to be a disagreement about the legitimacy of this operation, in Israel, the vast majority of the population supports this, even wide-reaching goals, once not explicitly stated as the official goals of the operation, like toppling the Iranian regime. These findings and other findings are available in a survey on the INSS website. I am Ofer Dayan, a researcher at the INSS focusing on anti-Semitism and delegitimization. And in this special episode, I am joined by Ofer Shelah, director of Israel's National Policy Research Program, and Anat Shapira, a researcher in the same program. In accordance with the IDF Home Front Command, we are again recording this episode remotely. This is Brief.IL. Let's begin. So let's start with you, Ofer. Before we dive into the survey that we conducted at the INSS, please tell us a bit what is currently happening and what Israel and the United States are trying to achieve in this operation.
Well, that is, of course, the great mystery, isn't it? Because when President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu first spoke about the operation, they termed the objective as far as the Iranian regime as creating, and I quote, creating the condition for the regime to fall. And the president even said explicitly that he expected the brave Iranian people to rise after the operation and topple the regime. Since then, that is, of course, in a way, a little hazy, because you could say at any given point in time after the initial operation that you've created those conditions, because once the supreme leader was killed and once the blow was dealt to both personally and structurally to many important parts of the regime, therefore, you could at any point say, well, we've done our share in that respect. So we don't know what the leaders really mean by that. And history tells us that what they did think before the operation started may change as time goes by. I think the Iranians are reading it the same way, and that's why they're directing most of their firepower. We feel that here in Israel, of course, but they're directing most of it towards, let's call it third-party states, entities that they think could influence Washington to stop, because everybody understands that Israel will not be the one to stop. It would be the United States. Now, the other objectives, which are, let's say, more physical, and that is destroying the capabilities of Iran, both the nuclear project and the military missile and Navy and Air Force and the military capabilities of Iran. That is a physical thing that is going on, that much has been achieved in. Of course, you could always achieve more, but I think eventually how long the campaign will last depends first and foremost on the President of the United States and his inside the U.S. Political pressures, and could always be stated as mission accomplished.
So Anat, Ofer discussed the fact that we set the goal as setting the conditions for a toppling of the regime, but according to the survey that you conducted, it shows that Israelis are not satisfied with setting the conditions. 63% of Israelis are interested in continuing this operation until the regime collapses. Why do you think, or what is the origin for this disparity between the stated goals that Israel and the United States stated at the onset of this operation and the Israeli public's aspiration to see the regime falls?
So I think one thing we need to remember is the fact that for many Israelis, this is an achievable goal, right? So when we asked, what do you think will be likely? We saw that, for example, about 70% believe that the regime will be damaged, and of them, almost a quarter believe that the regime will be toppled. So when people believe that it is possible to topple the regime, it is also more likely that they're expecting this to be the end game of the campaign. I think the other thing we need to understand is that for many Israelis at this point in time, the key question is whether this is the war that will end all wars, or whether this is the war that will show us that we shall forever live by our sword. And in that sense, without a regime change, especially given the fact that we've fought against Iran only 8 months ago, people believe that unless we make a significant change in the motivations of the regime, capabilities can always be built. I think many Israelis are currently skeptical about the idea of removing capabilities as something that can be permanent or long-lasting. And within that context, the idea is to say, well, if we don't want to repeat this in 8, 10, 12 months from now, we have to do it until there is a regime change. Whether this optimism is justified or not is a different question. I'll let Ofer refer to.
While we see full coordination or almost full coordination between the US and Israel, we see some sort of a difference between the public opinion in Israel and the United States. Well, in the United States, this war is a very partisan issue. We see actually both sides of the political map, the isolationists on the conservative side and then the progressives on the democratic side who object to this war. Here in Israel, 81%, which is an overwhelming majority of Israelis, approve of this operation or campaign. So, Ofer, what do people here in Israel see that people in the US don't? What are the different considerations people take into account when voting on such an issue?
Well, for us, of course, it's a very personal and palpable thing. First of all, we're being fired upon, as we have been before, by Iran. Second, Israelis grew to believe, and I think rightly, that Iran is behind everything. And when we think about October 7th, the worst day, probably the worst day in Israel's military history, we think of Iran as orchestrating the whole thing, whether there was a direct command from Tehran to Sinwar to start the war or not, and there probably wasn't. But Iran was behind the axis, what was called the axis of evil, which is, when we talk about fighting on 7 fronts, all of them relate to the axis of evil. So for us, yes, let's end it once for all. I'm not sure that most Israelis think that this is possible. I think what they expressed in the poll that Anat referred to was their hope and expectation that this will be a goal. And I don't think they'll be disappointed or there'll be any public outcry if this does not happen, because that'll be ascribed to lack of will by the United States, not by Israel. What is it?
And maybe by the Iranian people.
Yes, and everybody here knows, and we've had bitter experience in that, and the United States had as well, that first of all, it's very tough to topple a regime with an air campaign, and I'll add to that, and that is often said, but I'll add to that when you do it with boots on the ground, often it doesn't end well. Didn't end well for Israel in Lebanon, didn't end well for the United States in Iraq, only to give 2 examples. So, and what the Americans see is a foreign war. Those who oppose, actually, I think those who, without getting too deeply into the American public opinion, I think those who support the war support the president and his decision to go to war. And those who are opposed to the president. And also they see a foreign war in a faraway land that they do not perceive as a real threat to the United States, that put American lives in danger. There have already been American KIAs in this operation, and they are scarred by past decisions to go to war for similar reasons, be it Vietnam or be it Iraq, and by the government lying to them. The various administrations lying to them about it. So that is the basis for that, and that is understandable as well. And as I said before, creates internal pressure in the United States, which may lead President Trump eventually to decide to end the war.
I totally agree. And I want to add here, recently published survey among US adults showed that many of them are scared that Iran will be a bigger threat to the United States now than it was before this campaign started. So maybe that's another thing that can influence how they view it. But Anat, I want to go back to this issue of President Trump and the partisanship, because it's very obvious that President Trump is a partisan issue in his own country, in the United States. It was some sort of a common phrase here to say that President Trump is a much loved and adored personality here in Israel. Everyone likes him. We see in this survey that there is also partisanship in terms of how Israelis perceive Trump's let's say, care for Israel's national security and how genuine President Trump is in doing what he's doing here in the Middle East. What can you tell us about this?
So I agree that a lot of the Israelis believe Trump, especially because of the way he has expressed himself regarding the issue of pardoning Netanyahu, but also expressing views on specific internal Israeli affairs as a political personality in the Israeli context. I think that for most people, it's not just about these things, though. It's also about his erratic behavior altogether. You can see, for example, the many interviews he has given since the campaign in Iran has started, and the different references he has made, both to the goal of the war and to the means he's willing to apply and to the length of the war. So I think people kind of feel as though, given the contradictory statements that the president has been issuing, it is very hard to rely on that. And I think given the way he aligns himself to some extent with Netanyahu, especially with regard to the pardon issue, makes people identify the interests of both leaders in a way that makes the viewing more partisan in that context.
And we've seen this actually more on the supposedly president side or the MAGA side of things. And that is this war, however it ends, may create an apparent basis for the conspiracy theory, according to which Israel is a sort of tail wagging the dog, leading the U.S. to wars that are contradictory to the U.S. interest, going back to the Iraq War in 2003, but in a much more overt way. And we've been seeing declarations, we've been hearing declarations and even conflicting declarations from the president said, I did not push Israel to war, or Israel did not push me to war, maybe I pushed them. But we've been hearing different things from different parts of the administration. And that's for Israel in the long term, not immediately, but in the long term, looking forward to is problematic. You are much more, adamant than I, but it's definitely problematic for the way Israel is viewed by large portions of the American public.
So thank you, Ofer, for these comments. I'm just going to make a quick teaser for our listeners and our viewers. An INSS insight about this topic, exactly what Ofer mentioned, written by me, is going to be posted on the INSS website very soon. So hopefully, if that interests you, you can read more about that. But Ofer, I want to stay with you. And despite this massive escalation, and we see rockets incoming into Israel from Hezbollah, from Iran, still, Israelis' assessment of their country's national security has increased since the start of the war, which for many non-Israelis might sound very, very surprising or even odd. Do you think it has to do with specific actions that were taken on the ground by Israel or by the United States, or just a general sentiment that things are happening and being taken care of?
First of all, let me add another piece of data, which is even more interesting, is that in the same poll, people said that their own personal feeling of safety has
They make the distinction between personal safety and national security.
Exactly, and that's obviously because we're spending several hours a day in shelters and constantly, even more than in other parts of the war, in certain parts of Israel or in most of Israel, at bomb shelters and so on. But yes, the feeling is, and I think it's justified, that when you look at the war, its entirety, and you look at the war, you ask yourself, as Israelis do, are we more secure? Is Israel nationally, as we said, more secure than it was on October 8th? The answer is definitely yes. And the axis of evil, you look at it, Hezbollah is much weakened. Yes, it fires on Israel, but had you asked me on October 6th, 2023, I would have told you that not only is the firepower of Hezbollah the most imminent threat to Israel's security, that I don't know what we can do about it. And we have done, and now Hezbollah is much weakened, and it will be more weakened in the weeks to come. Syria, the President Assad, who was part of the Axis, is no longer there. Iran, even the Houthis are not firing right now. So it's definitely, you look at it from the national perspective, yes, things are better. You look at it from a personal perspective, I don't like running to the bomb shelter 5 times a day.
Yeah, none of us. But there's also significant differences between this operation and the operation in June. And for example, a smaller proportion of Israelis now worry about how the operation will develop. And Israelis are more certain that the public is able to endure a longer operation than they were in June. What changed between now and June that elicited these responses?
So I think first of all, it's better the devil you know. We've been through war with Iran, we've survived, and I think in part this has effect on the way people are believing and how concerned people are to the continuation of the war. I think another element is that we now have the United States on our side, and for many Israelis that means we're much stronger, we're much more capable, and our chances of success are much higher. Let me remind you that in the beginning of Operation Rising Lion in June, there were a lot of discussions about how coordinated Israel is with the United States and whether the United States will intervene. And what we've seen, because we held 2 surveys during Rising Lion, is that once the American intervened, the sense of security amongst Israelis improved. So I think the fact that in this operation, from the get-go, we had the American support is also important. I think we also need to take into account the fact that we're still in the first days of this war. And to an extent, we have
Yes, just in important context, we're recording this on noon on Thursday, March 5th, which is the 6th day of the war.
And to this point, Israel has not suffered many costs and losses. I mean, every loss and every casualty is, of course, regrettable. But when we look at what we were preparing ourselves for, I think the Israeli public feels as though this is something that we can endure. I think also we need to look into the idea of expectation coordination. I think the fact that from the get-go, it was very much stated to the Israeli public that this is going to be a longer operation, that we're going to uproot more significant causes, and we also aim to achieve more than we achieved in Rising Lion in the 12 days war, meant that people were willing to endure it for longer.
Because they understand we're fighting country, not a terrorist organization.
In part,
Among
but also
other things.
in Rising Lion, we also fought the
Right.
country. I think the key point here is to say people were told this is going to take several weeks at the very least, and that's why they've prepared themselves mentally for that idea. I think we need to remember that resilience is a lot about perception. The way people view things, the way people view their ability, the levels of trust people have, the levels of solidarity are much shaped by their perception of events. The fact that people feel as though they were informed in this regard, the fact that people had this coordination of expectation with the military, with the government, and in general, means that people believe they can endure more and therefore are resilient.
So often there are also changes since Saturday when this operation started. So Israelis indicate that when the operation started on Saturday, they were unclear about what they should do. The Home Front Command was sending mixed messages, but now they're saying that they're more clear about what is expected of them. Do you think something actually changed? Is Israel even, and the IDF even capable of drawing lessons and improving in such a short time span?
I don't think so. First of all, you get used to everything, and people get used to, and we are coming as Israelis from the intense fighting of 2.5 years. For a lot of Israelis, I think myself included, it's not the fact that you call it a new war or a new campaign. It's the continuation of the same campaign. By the way,
From October
last June,
7th, not even from June.
Yes, and during what was called Lion's Roar last June, I spoke to senior military officials who wanted to know what's going on the outside, and I told them, you look at it as a different campaign. You look at it as what is now called the 12-day war with Iran. For us back home, this is this has been going on since October 7th. And when you talk about resilience and you talk about ability to withstand certain things, you have to look at it from that perspective. And I think I agree with everything that Anat said. So far, the strain on the Israeli public is something that has become for us tolerable. Whether that is good for a nation to live like this or not is up to everybody's. You can form your own opinion of that, but it's definitely the fact. But I'll add one more thing, which is coming to the picture, and that is the Lebanon front, because the Lebanon front, first of all, entails the drafting of many more, tens of thousands of more of reservists who had served for hundreds of days since October 7th, 2023. And it's a huge burden on them, on their families, their businesses, it's a social, mental, whatever problem that Israel has to deal with. And to quote the chief of staff, this is not something that is going to be days. It's going to be weeks, maybe more. He talked about months. And if that is the new situation in the north, internally in Israel, that may become even a bigger question than the Iran war.
I genuinely believe that the Lebanese front reopening will have significant effect on the Israeli public. We need to remember that the survey data we have was mostly before Hezbollah joined the war. Most respondents answered before Hezbollah joined the war. So we don't actually know in terms of data the Israeli public response. But what we do see is that while the IDF has declared that there will be no evacuation of settlements in the north, we do see there's a lot of targeting of cities. There has been today even media reports about, again, fears of a land invasion from Lebanon. And I think that ultimately, both the burden on the Israeli public from Lebanon, ironically, is felt by some parts of the public, though not equally all across the country, much more heavily than the burden of the Iran war. And also because, as Ofer pointed out, Lebanon requires boots on the ground, quite literally, whether for defensive or whether there will be also even further increase in the land operation in Lebanon. This does mean that the power balance and the calculation balance of most Israelis will be different following that.
So I want to talk about briefly about something that I found very, very worrisome about the survey, Anat, and that is that there's differences between different sects of Israeli society. And Israeli Arabs attest that they do not understand the rationale of this operation as much as Jewish Israelis do. What do you think is the origin of this disparity between how Israeli Jews and Arab Jews understand the operation?
So I will first like to point out that regarding the Arab population in Israel, I would take every survey data with cautious. First of all, we need to remember that even though our sample is a representative sample, it is still 200 people, and it's very hard to deduce from that about the majority of the population, especially given that for many questions, Arab respondents tend to respond more with "I don't know," which means that actually what you have is a sample which is much smaller than you would believe. I think the other thing that you need to remember is that in terms of protection, having bomb shelters, having safe rooms, and all of that, Arab cities in Israel are much less protected than Jewish cities, which therefore means that in terms of how worried about you are about the development of the war, how safe you feel, and all of those things that eventually tie into the decision of how you understand the war, do you understand the purpose of the war, and things like that, because it affects the bigger picture. Our population is affected very differently than the Jewish population in Israel, and therefore I'm not surprised at the differences of opinions. I think to all that, we need to also add the fact that our survey asks a lot of questions about the IDF. And we need to remember that the way our population answers questions about the IDF is also shaped by other considerations like national identity and things like that. So I think ultimately,
and the fact that they don't have, most of them do not have to serve in the IDF
and don't have personal acquaintance with it. And all of those things, which is why I am not surprised by these gaps. And I think they're consistent all throughout, as Ofer said, our war since October 7th.
We're not seeing this now, but we will see it as time goes by, if the war goes on, and that is, of course, that the war becomes part of the political debate in Israel. And since this war and the decision to go to war is so personally associated with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and even taking into account the fact that we are in an election year in Israel, and Israelis are always very suspicious of things that happen during an election year. So when you look at the Jewish population, this sort of you see it across the political map. The Arab Israelis are on one side of the political map vis-a-vis the government and the prime minister. So when you see the relative outcome, it's also affected by this, in addition to everything that Anat mentioned.
Often, I want to stay on this issue of social divisions, and maybe unsurprisingly for Israelis, but very surprisingly maybe for our listeners who do not live in Israel, people seem to be much more worried about internal divisions here in Israel than they are about the state of security of the country and even their own personal safety. How do you explain that? And do you think that the fact that 81% of Israelis support this operation, does this have maybe the opportunity to narrow some gaps or divisions, or would it only widen them later in this operation?
I don't think it would narrow them or widen them, because I think, and we saw that vis-a-vis October 7th, which is a much more traumatic experience for Israelis, that in time, during the first days or first months after October 7th, there was a feeling of unity and also an emergency situation. And of course, when you're in an emergency situation, you tend to circle the wagons and look outside and not inside. But as time went by, and this was not surprising to anybody who knows a little something about the Israeli public or the Israeli political scene, even the war became sort of was assimilated, sort of fused into the political debate, including the very tough political debate that took place before October 7th and during 2023 until October 7th. So, and this is definitely going to be the same thing about Iran, especially if the outcome is not, clearly decided. If the regime survives, yes, if the regime survives, and yes, I think personally that the capabilities, the blow to Iran's capabilities will have significant meaning. But even now, when people look back to last June, so a lot of people from the side, whether in society or the political arena, who who are against Prime Minister Netanyahu, say, well, last June you promised us that you said that the outcome of the operation was that the nuclear project was gone, was obliterated, and the missile capabilities were annihilated, and so on, and we find ourselves in a new war 8 months afterwards. So it will become part of the debate, and I personally think that there's very little movement in that sense. And you saw that in polls after Lions Roar, where Prime Minister Netanyahu expected to make some political headway after the operation. It did not happen, and that I don't
After Rising Lion.
Yes, I always get my lions mixed up. So
that's why I always say June. It's easier.
Yeah. I don't like that name. Anyway, so I don't think it'll affect the public opinion. I'm not talking about the political results. I'm talking about public opinion in that sense. Be the outcome of the war what it may be.
If I may add, what we see now, and this is how you get the 81% support, is the effect of rallying around the flag. And we know that this is a short-term effect, right? We know that people rally for a very short period of time, usually month. And we also know that the effect itself tends to erode as time goes by, but also that social division and polarizing discourse increases the erosion of rallying around the flag effect. So what we are likely to see is that as the war progresses and more social division appears and more polarizing discourse appears, in social media, in general media, and within political figures themselves, and we've seen the start of it over the last couple of days, we are likely to see the effect erodes, and as a result, also the unity, fake unity, disappearing.
So we started with Ofer, and I want us to finish with you, Anat. And I want to look forward and maybe a little backward also. We asked in many of our surveys about trust in Israeli institutions. And we also asked about this in this survey. And it seems that trust rose in all institutions across the board, the political echelon, the military. But inside the military, it seems that the IDF as a whole and the Israeli Air Force got more support from the public or trust from the public than did the IDF intelligence. Do you think it has to do with the lasting trauma of October 7th? And how do you see this going forward? Because the Israeli intelligence did have some amazing successes over the past 2.5 years, especially in this operation as well. So do you see it changing, or do you think it will still take some time?
So I think, first of all, that we need to remember that, again, this rise in trust is also the result of the rallying around the flag effect. And what we see here is that the excitement and the trust that people express in the army and all branches of the army rises at the beginning of military operations. But what you need to bear in mind is that there is also a question of what was the starting point. And for both the IDF and the Air Force, the increase in trust is similar to the increase in trust in the intelligence. But the difference is whether or not they had the same starting point. And I agree with what you said about the fact that the different starting point of the intelligence has a lot to do with October 7th. It also has a lot to do with different public perceptions of different parts of the army. And we know that the intelligence corps is generally perceived as more elitist, as more representing of parts of Israeli society.
And not representing us, the people answering the survey.
Exactly. And this in part is reflected in the different starting points of the different corps.
Okay. Ofer, Anat, thank you very much. I assume we'll talk again sometime during this war that will hopefully reach its fast and successful conclusion in our days. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's it for this episode. This was Brief.IL by INSS, a weekly dive into the events shaping Israel's national security. We warmly invite you to follow us on any podcast platform of your choice. You can also watch us on YouTube on the INSS channel. And of course, stay safe wherever you are. Thank you to our incredible team, Ariel Nugrian, Shai Shachaf, and Omer Vixelbaum.